Hello, everyone. Welcome to Homemakers Radio. I hope you get something done while you listen, or maybe you'd like to use it for walking or for just resting. And today I'd like to share with you my teacup before you go. This is one of the ones from Grace's Teaware. You can get these online for the same price as in Home Goods. They're not expensive, but they're absolutely beautiful and quite strong. And I like it because it goes with my gold plaid shirt. This is a different shirt than the one I wore a few videos ago. And I live out in farm country and people are wearing plaid. In fact, today was church and I wore a solid black long skirt with this to dress it up a little. And people are wearing plaid. The preacher wears a plaid shirt. The people that serve and lead, the song leader, the people that wait on the Lord's table, they're all wearing plaid shirts. The ladies wear plaid shirts, and there's one color for every season, it seems like, and it's quite a cheerful fabric. I am enjoying it, and I got a lot of mine at Walmart a few years ago, and they are 100% cotton. Before you go, I'd also like to share with you my creation from the paper bag challenge that I've given to my children and grandchildren, and they have made things like placemats and place cards, which is nice, and food coverings. So today I have a flower press. Now, you know, the flower presses that we've had in the past are just kind of a cumbersome thing. You have to unscrew it all. If you want to put new flowers in, you have to unscrew it all, take it all apart, put the flowers in between acid-free paper, put corrugated cardboard over that, and then add more layers, put it all back together again. And they are you can make your own, or they're very, very expensive, 35 to 45, 65 on up dollars for an old-fashioned flower press. But I just decided to make it simple so that everyone could have one. And I just punched holes in it and made my own string out of the paper bag itself. So I want to show you how this works, and that is you put the little leaf inside, or the flower. Now, what were flowers used? Well, this is where, remember that scripture I quoted to you last time? Walk in the old paths and ask for the old ways where the good walk is, and there you'll find rest for your souls. Well, this is part of it, finding out how things worked and what they were for. Well, they would dry these flowers and then enclose them, paste them on letter paper, make stationery out of them. Or they would enclose them in a letter, or make a picture with them. And there are still pictures you can see in museums of these flowers arranged in a circle or arranged around a painting or a picture. So what I do with this, temporarily I would smash it shut with clothespins all around it to press it down. But the best thing, of course, is to lay it under a big old book like this. Now, in the past, I used to take old phone books, the used phone book, or the used catalogs, and they had the more newspaper print type porous paper, and we could put the flowers and petals and leaves in those. The problem was trying to find out where they were. So those things were really thick, and they were really the best because they really pressed them well. But you still had to put other books on top of it. So this is a simple way to do this, put other books on top of it. Now, when it's all finished, you could actually just leave it as it is and glue these leaves in it to hold it and just make a book. But generally they were used for something. And so this is what I'm trying to do. It's kind of an experiment, and I'm just going to set an old book on top of it for a while and let those get nice and dry and flat. And so before I get started on Jane Austen's lifestyle book, which I'm just enjoying so much, and I am learning so much from it, because what Brian Kozlowski, the author, has done is pulled out some observations from these books, rather than what we would term kind of a comedic quest for love and he saw a lot of other things in it. And I wish someone would do a similar story of wives and daughters and some observations. And I don't think he covered manners and I'm not sure in this book that there was anything about Jane Austen world manners, except in the mind-body connection. How to control your emotions. And so I'm going to read some more of this today, but I want to discuss some little thing first, and I'm going to read from the chapter called Jane Austen Eats Garden Stuff. So I'd like to make an observation, though, that, you could write. I'll give you some new titles. And it is reading in Austen world, manners in Austen world, and writing in Austen world. How many times do we see in these novels of the 1830s, I guess, of description of someone writing to their sister or writing to someone? And I looked up old paintings of that era to see if I could find out what their view of people writing was, and I found a lot of delightful oil paintings that were copyright free that I can put on my page here, showing women writing letters. And I thought, I need inspiration sometime. I'm very behind in correspondence. And I looked at those paintings and decided to dress up to write a letter. And I cannot tell you how much a better mood it put me in and how much more cheerful I was about it, wearing a costume. So, but just do your best, and if you need to write a letter, dress up for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I've learned a lot from my grandchildren because they like to make an event out of everything. If they're going to write a letter, they'll have everything all set up nicely, and they'll take their pen and they'll gaze out the window and think about what they're going to write, and just all a big event. It's a ceremony. This is what I'm doing today. It's not something on their list they have to get done, and it's not work. And so this is one of the things that I noticed about this chapter on Jane Austen Eats Garden Stuff. Remember when Jane asked Lizzie, when did you first start to like Mr. Darcy? And she said, I believe is when I saw his beautiful gardens at Pemberley. I got to thinking about that, and I realized that I had some books on gardens of the past. I have The Language of Flowers. Someone sent me this one, and we used to read these and kind of laugh at them. Back even in the 50s, everyone knew a little smattering of garden poetry, like My love is like a red, red rose, or She walks in beauty like the night, things like that. We would just kind of laugh at them. They were also part of the comedy of the time, and everybody knew a little bit of them. Then I started to look at it more carefully, and I have this other one about gardens, and discovered that gardens were the source of inspiration, and even for women, they were something quite soft about gardens. It softened their mood, and the women were compared in some of the poetry, which we thought back in the olden days being rather silly. I see now they were being compared to the gardens. The gardens were actually quite healthful and luxurious, and if you've ever had a garden where you just go out and you graze a little bit and you eat some of the things straight out of the garden, you feel instant likeness. You feel instantly healthy, instantly nourished. It is so different than commercial food. And so I was looking through these and finding paintings of women in gardens and realizing this poetry, what it was saying, was similar to what the author of the Jane Austen Diet was saying, that the gardens were so essential to life and to their future that like I read before, a father-in-law would have wanted to provide a garden for his son so that he would be attractive. Wouldn't that be nice? And and so I have several of these, and I'll be reading them with different eyes now. And I kept them. I wasn't sure anyone would be interested in, and the authors are not like famous people. And it just talks about the flowers and what they represent, and so I might explore that a little bit more and learn some more. So now I'm also going to cover a little bit of manners first before I begin to read. So I want to just remind everybody as a homemaker and homeschooler to let our casual talk, I talked to you about last time about avoiding as much as possible going into gory details about ill health and how that's not good for young people to, we want the young people to look up to the older women for mentorship and everything, but who wants to be around somebody who's talking about her organs and she's talking about her surgeries, or just talking about her ill health and or someone else's, or talking about disease all the time? It's not encouraging to really young people. They want to be around life. They want to be around accomplishment, and they want to be encouraged. So I would also like to include in this the making sure our casual talk is of excellent quality, and in a way that someone may say of you, her speech was refined, intelligent, and she never spoke a silly, idle word. And what that really means is they don't as a woman that doesn't sit around going on and on about some silly thing that isn't going to be beneficial for someone. Now, all of you probably know someone or have known someone in the past who, man or woman, whenever they spoke, whenever they answered a question, whenever they greeted someone, it had a deeper meaning. They were loaded with care. They were careful, and they were careful that what they said would benefit someone else. This is very rare. There is a man we have at church, an elderly man, whose parents must have really taught him to guard his speech and to be careful, because he always speaks that which you would remember. He never utters a word that isn't memorable. And it's hard to describe. I used to write it all down in an old Bible I had. He said something, I would write it down in the margin because I thought it was brilliant. And so be careful also. This is another problem. Be careful also of where people's minds are going when you're talking, because they are not everyone is going to grasp what you're saying and look at the whole picture. They're going to get little tidbits off of it and run here and run there with their minds. So I wanted to show you an example without incriminating anyone. I'm just making this up so that you can understand. Someone asked someone else, where do you get your ideas from? And so she began to tell her ideas for homemaking or homeschooling. Well, I go into the past, and I also go to antique stores. I look around at things. By the way, I'll interrupt myself. Somebody was asking me about these McGuffey readers. Look, some of you probably have something like this already in your home and don't know it. You picked it up somewhere, or you inherited it, or it's sitting out on a table because it kind of goes with that country look or antique look. You probably have something like this somewhere. But these are reproductions of the original. There's no changes made in them. They have a brand new paper and brand new print, and you can get them online. Just look up for the original McGuffey's readers. Or in your country, there must be something that school children had 100 years ago that you could use if you wanted to. Now, the homeschoolers in America went with these because we wanted to go back to something that helped people learn to read and write. And there was a time in our nation, in spite of the fact there were no public schools, that every child could read. Every child could read and write. There was no one left out. And that's because our language, it's not a big mystery. There are there are 26 letters in the alphabet and 44 sounds. But I wanted to explain that about this reader, and also wanted to tell you that what you say to someone that they are taking away they go off on tangents. Their minds they're not all going to be like you. And being a homemaker, we want to help people. And if you're a Christian, we want to bring them to the knowledge of the truth. But they're not all going to think like you. And so don't be disappointed if only about 1% of people will identify with you and be good company for you and be a good friend. It's real easy to think that we're going to do like we did with our children with homeschooling. I would read something to my children or tell them where I got my ideas. They would understand it and grasp it and adapt it into their own life. But it doesn't work with other people. It only works with the people that you're responsible for. Now, some people will respond, but most do not. And so you have to be careful what you say. So one lady was asking another lady, where do you get your ideas for homemaking? And where do you get your inspiration for your life? And she would say, well, I go around looking at the past. I try to find out, what did our grandparents and great-grandparents believe and how did they live? And then I adapt it into the modern life. And I'm not able to do a lot of the things that they did, but I can at least understand it, and it gives my life some depth and meaning. And so she began to explain how she went to antique shops once in a while when she had time and looked at old books, pictures, photographs, other things. And the one lady that was listening to it said, well, I don't see how you can get anything done when you're gone all the time at antique stores. Now, you see where she took that and made an assumption and ran off with it. And so you have to be really careful how you speak to people and don't reveal so much until you find out whether or not they are able to, if they are people of understanding. You have to be very, very careful. Another time, someone was explaining that she got a lot of her ideas for her homemaking and for even her decorating from places she had been, places she had visited, travels that she had had, and how she wanted to be able to take care of her home on a very slim budget, just very, very slim, not go overly expensive on anything. And so the other lady was listening to her, and she said, well, if you hadn't been to all those places, you would be able to afford a new couch. See how they go, the judgmentalness and everything. And you need to train your children to listen to something fully and then draw the right conclusions. And that's one of the reasons for books like this with stories, because at the end of every story, and it's called reading comprehension. Once you learn reading comprehension, you learn how to think and how to judge things properly without jumping to wild conclusions and taking off on a tangent and discouraging other people with rude remarks. And so that's why at the end of every one of these chapters in a reader like this, they have questions. Okay, like the question at the end of this chapter is called the Bible. Remember what I read to you last time? Read it for improvement and not for show. That was one of the first things for you to ponder on. But at the end of the chapter, the questions, what is the meaning of the word Bible? What does the word Scripture signify? How may the excellency of the Bible be proved? What does the Bible open to us? And other things that are revealed in here. So I'm going to just read another sentence out of here, and this helps children, it helps you to reach the right conclusion and to have good judgment and kindness in what you say by listening a certain way. Now, I was talking to a lady the other day who was explaining how much she liked a picture that she had bought, and she sent me a text with a picture of it. That wasn't my style. I didn't like the modernness of it, and I wouldn't have bought it, but I never said anything about it. I said, it's nice you found something that you enjoy. And so you got to be really careful what you say to people, but also when other people are trying to explain something, don't jump in and reach another conclusion. And one of the bad habits that children have is coming in the back door of a conversation. And what that literally means is you be in the kitchen, they come in the back door, and they're listening to you explain something to one of the other children, and they'll say, "You guys are talking about me," or "Does that mean I can't have a new bike?" or something. And it was totally off the subject, but they thought they knew just by the few words that they heard at the tail end of something. Don't come in the back door of a conversation. That's very rude. Just sit and wait and listen. Because how many times have we drawn wrong conclusions? I used to say things like, how could it be so cold outside all of a sudden? And then I would start to explain something, and somebody would jump in and say, well, it wasn't cold. You see, this is the thing. We have to be more, I would say, agreeable in conversation. Doesn't mean you have to agree to things that aren't true or things that are immoral or bad, but to be kind and to be careful about what you say in case you're with someone who's immature and they're going to run with it in another direction. And we've all heard those silly things, haven't we? Or to be careful what you say with someone who doesn't have the experience that you have or the maturity. And withhold. Don't try to be confidential with everybody. Just have a few people or one person or maybe even nobody, maybe just God, if you're concerned about it. Okay, now I've learned a lot of this as a preacher's wife because I have more of a social life than many of you, and I've met all kinds. And I realized that a lot of the misunderstandings and trouble that people caused was because of what they heard. And I remember one time, I'll tell you this, things we have to be really careful about is that a woman might just say, oh, I'm just trying to cut back on spending, and, I'm just trying to keep from, I can't afford this or I can't afford that. And then someone else will say something that will hurt her feelings and say, well, you should probably go out and get a second job. And so you have to be just careful what you say. Some people just don't understand that you're just talking, and I think it's better just to listen. So after that, I think I should read this to you. It's this next part of this lesson called the Bible from the McGuffey Reader, number 3. Now my favorite is number 4. I believe you could educate yourself from first grade to college level on number 4. It has everything in it. And the beginnings of these books are so useful because the very beginning of this sets you up and tells you how punctuation is designed, what a comma is for, what a semicolon looks like and what it means, the colon, a period. Do you know about semicolons? What it means is that you have kind of a one sentence in front of it, but you're continuing the thought. So there's a semicolon, and then you repeat the thought in different words in the second part. So they didn't give an example here, and then a note of interrogation, a note of exclamation, a hyphen, parentheses, and apostrophe, and then explanations of stops, and this, and I noticed here there is a section called the effects of rashness. I have told you about rashness before, and so I might read that sometime. There's two parts to it. But this is the part about the Bible. The word Bible means book, and the sacred volume is so called because it is the book of books. Now, you knew that, didn't you? That the word Bible means book of books. And so that's why we see things like cookbooks that will be called the Cake Bible. Or we'll have the Nature Bible, which means a book full of books smashed together into one huge book. It's a book of books. That's what Bible means. The word scripture signifies writings. So script, write, is writing. The Bible was not written at one time or by one person, but consists of various parts written at different times by different men. It is divided into two testaments called the Old and the New, chiefly with reference to the time when they were published. The Old was published before the coming of Christ, and the New was published after his death. So that is enough for a child or even adult to ponder on for a long, long time. You don't have to rush through homeschooling and get through a grade or get through anything. They could do a lot with this. They could write this in their copybook. You could write it in your commonplace book. It is a very, very good thing to know, and it will go deep in you. It at first settles kind of like oil on top of water, and eventually it begins to penetrate your mind. Now I'm going to go into Brian Kozlowski's book, The Jane Austen Diet. I have really benefited from this, and yesterday was going around trying to find fresh stuff to eat and thinking about Lizzie admiring the gardens at Pemberley and what he said here about how important these gardens were. In fact, we used to show people our gardens when they came to visit. That would be the first thing we did while it was still light, to go outside and look at the garden. And people enjoyed seeing the different ways that their friends created their gardens. Now I'm going to repeat some of the things that I read last time. Okay, so you've heard this part before, but I'm going to go back because I like to catch up that way. In her simpler way, Austen loved keeping up with the Tilneys whenever she could, pottering about in her own kitchen garden at Chawton, and getting the agreeable surprise of finding the first summer strawberries in the patch, or detecting the first apricot on one of the trees. Today, those who have grown anything remotely edible, even if it's just a pot of parsley on the fire escape, can relate to Austen's agreeable surprises and fuzzy feelings for her little plot of earth. The garden is quite a love, she said, but once this lovely garden stuff got into her kitchen, things started to look a little different from what we might expect today. Austen didn't go wild and crazy with her vegetable cookery. She didn't mold her boiled spinach into a pudgy likeness of the Prince Regent, in case you're worried. And there are a few historical differences in how Jane approached the edible English verdew. Like everything else in Austen's kitchen, plants came with distinct dietary rules, ways to enjoy and eat them most healthfully. Nothing wacky, just the Regency take on traditional plant-eating strategies inherited the world over. Some of them you might recognize, others have been almost forgotten in recent years, but as it happens, they are all of them very clever. Perhaps the main reason the Regency era developed such a misunderstood veggie reputation was due to its strict views on cooking them. Whereas we might look at a platter of raw, crisp vegetables versus a pot of cooked soft vegetables and jump to the quick conclusion that the raw option is healthier, people in Austen's era did the opposite. For them, the historic rule of thumb upheld that a cooked vegetable was generally safer than a raw one. Some people even cooked their cucumbers. I personally eat them stewed, said one Regency parson with dietary pride. Just draw the line at cooking lettuce or cucumbers or radishes. You don't chuckle too quickly. Every traditional culture from Asia to the Americas has thought along these exact lines. Rather than viewing the vegetable kingdom as one big raw bar to casually nibble through, our ancestors were much more cautious about their garden stuff. For them, most vegetables were regarded as tricky little foods that needed the magic of cooking to make them more nutritious. Their reasons were twofold, and both equally smart. On one hand, they knew that starchy vegetables are always easier to digest when cooked. Heat breaks down and releases the edible energy trapped inside tough plant tissue. On the other hand, they recognize that many plants in their raw state come with natural toxins humans should carefully avoid. Given our modern raw equals healthier outlook, we tend to forget how chemically potent and problematic many raw plant foods actually are. Legumes, especially peas, beans, lentils, contain high traces of lectin compounds, natural toxins that can cause serious gastrointestinal distress when not cooked properly. Raw lima beans have a chemical that turns into cyanide in our bodies. Yes, as in full-on Agatha Christie cyanide. And eating just 4 raw kidney beans is enough to give you lectin poisoning. Uncooked cruciferous vegetables, such as cabbage, broccoli, and kale, often added to modern green smoothies, contain goitrogenic chemicals that can interfere with the proper working of your thyroid. The same goes for raw spinach, okra, eggplant, and Swiss chard, all containing oxalates and phytates, anti-nutrients that can block your body's ability to absorb essential minerals like calcium, zinc, and iron. And I have mentioned oxalates before because I found when I eliminated eating so many vegetables and fruits and foods that are high oxalate, those are things that are in plants that form crystals in your membranes. So if you have sinus problems or kidney problems, you want to cut down on the high oxalate foods. And so because they irritate and cause pain. And so he's just warning about the high oxalate foods. And you can go online and look for a chart that has high oxalates, medium oxalates, and low oxalates. And it's not a diet. It's just kind of being aware of what foods are more likely to irritate you. Cooking has always been the easiest way to neutralize these potentially noxious compounds, the safest way to approach most vegetables, something firmly established throughout most of food history from the Regency era backwards. In Emma, anxious Mr. Woodhouse, with his usual love for jumping to extremes, seems to insist that anything out of the ground should be cooked 3 times over, a comic exaggeration even by Regency standards. Because, despite the lingering stereotype, Austen and her fellow veggie aficionados didn't overcook their garden stuff down to a pulpy mush. They loved the vibrant color, freshness, and flavor of vegetables, and certainly didn't enjoy ruining them with over-anxious caution. I noticed that the movie Emma had some kind of sensibility and sensitivity to this color of vegetables, because one of the opening scenes had a table laden with food and the colors were very vibrant. When you've overcooked a vegetable or a fruit, they turn really bad, no color in them at all. As a matter of fact, in the old days, when there was a magazine spread where they wanted to show a recipe, they undercooked the food so that the cameras in those days could make it look vibrant and still bright. And even today I see people making that mistake. I know our cameras are so much better now with the color, but they will cook something, fully cook it, take a picture of it, and post it, and sometimes it doesn't look too good. Writing in the British Housewife, one of the era's most popular cookbooks, Martha Bradley reminds her readers that spinach only needs a few minutes of gentle cooking before it's ready for the table. Salads were also popular at the time, deemed perfectly acceptable to eat raw and crisp. Notice that the ladies of Longbourn enjoy a cold cucumber salad at their luncheon in Pride and Prejudice. And yet, cooking most garden stuff properly was still viewed as integral to overall health, an outlet we can still embrace with dietary sense today. It's good to know the difference between the starchy vegetables and the other kind, because the ones that have the most starch, like beans, peas, limas, lentils, even potatoes, they are they are going to give you trouble in your stomach if they are not cooked. On the other hand, a cucumber and lettuce, maybe not so much. There was an era in the 1970s in which lettuce was being cooked. People were experimenting and sautéing it, stir-frying it to see what it would be like, but it didn't gain much following. In fact, it is now confirmed that many vegetables become more nutrient and vitamin rich when a little heat is applied. Now, I see that in carrots. You can absorb the carotene or the vitamins in a cooked carrot, better than, and corn too. Tomatoes, for instance, give off more of the antioxidant lycopene when cooked, and carrots release far higher levels of beta-carotene, becoming vitamin A in the body. Cooking also benefits asparagus, breaking down its fibrous cell walls and increasing our ability to absorb its vitamins and ferulic acid. The same goes for mushrooms. We can't fully tap into their unique nutritional value until they are cooked. Steaming things up with a little lively heat and animation, as they say in Persuasion, has its uses. So now I'm coming to this he has a little pink box when he's kind of summarizing something here. And this chapter is quite long, but I think I might finish it today. We've already explored Jane's relationship with fruit in previous chapters, but it's worth noting how enlightened her views were. At the time, the usual attitude was that fruits, just like vegetables, should be given a thorough cooking before they were safe to eat. Eating raw fruit, eating anything raw, had been regarded as risky to health since antiquity. Don't you remember the stories of the boys climbing over the fence to take apples from the neighbor's tree, and the apples were not ripe, and how they would end up with a terrible stomach ache? That was the worst juvenile delinquent crime in those days. Eating raw fruit, eating anything raw, had been regarded as risky to health since antiquity, not an unwise prejudice, considering heat was the easiest way to kill unwanted bacteria. You'll notice old-fashioned Mr. Woodhouse only recommends wholesome cooked fruit in Emma. Don't you remember he said have a little apple tart? But as Jane points out, Mr. Woodhouse is a bit behind the times. Since 1747, sailors in the British Navy began recognizing the curative power of raw fruit for preventing scurvy, a disease caused by the dietary lack of vitamin C, a heat-sensitive vitamin damaged whenever fruit is cooked. With two brothers in the Navy, Jane was evidently aware of this newfound respect for raw fruit, including many references in her novels, beginning in Sense and Sensibility, where Mrs. Jennings and Charlotte happily stuff themselves with mulberries straight from the tree. It follows through to Emma, where the ladies of Highbury are convinced that strawberries picked from the ground and popped in the mouth are decidedly wholesome, the only way of really enjoying them. Cutting-edge claims for 1815, still wonderfully accurate over 200 years later. On to Austen's next vegetable rule. To the Regency mind, a vegetable wasn't ready for consumption unless it was properly dressed. Austen speaks of receiving a present of sea kale in 1817, but defers eating it until the time it comes for dressing it. And just to clarify, this isn't a reference to salad dressing, or, for the more young at heart, a weird proclivity for outfitting veggies in Regency costumes, though I commend your spirit and join you in thinking that a Darcy-dressed Dacon might certainly be fun. Dressing a vegetable for Jane meant serving it with a succulent sauce, usually made with liberal quantities of cream or butter. A butter sauce was the usual method of dressing vegetables in England. Later we find Mr. Elton of Emma listing butter in the same breath alongside celery and beetroot. the vegetables served at the Coles dinner party. A melted butter sauce is likewise indispensable on Henry Tilney's table in Northanger Abbey. Hardly unique to Regency England, you'll find this vegetable fat pattern repeated the world over. From the Italian habit of drizzling olive oil generously over every vegetable in sight, to the Indian tradition of serving spinach with large chunks of cheese, to Southern grandmothers dutifully stewed collard beans with lots of bacon, the cross-cultural consensus is pretty solid. Vegetables should be eaten with fat. I have read this to you before, but now I'm reading it more logically. I was skipping around before. The best explanation for this was revealed in 2004 when scientists at Iowa State University carried out a now famous experiment. For 12 weeks, college students were given a bowl of salad with spinach, carrots, and tomatoes, and a range of salad dressings, from fat-free to full-fat dressings, to enjoy it with. And it said, though everyone ate the same salad, the students who ate their greens without any fat didn't absorb any of its healthy antioxidants, called carotenoids. Brightly colored nutrients found in carrots, tomatoes, and leafy vegetables turn into vitamin A in our bodies, yet despite eating them, essentially no beta-carotene was absorbed without the aid of fat. Only when a little oil was drizzled over their salad did the nutrients ever get absorbed. Now, I have explained this before in a homemaking hint that I get the sea salt from Imperfect Foods, which is just a beautiful, beautiful salt. And I put avocado oil on a salad and then sprinkle the salt on top of it. I don't even have to make a dressing. I just put those two things on the table, and everybody puts the kind of amount of oil and salt they want on their salad and makes a dressing, and they all say that the flavor is just wonderful. And so then you don't have to make up a salad dressing, and you don't have to use a commercial one that has so many maybe undesirable things for you. What theoretically understood since the early 20th century that many vitamins are fat-soluble, meaning they need fat to be properly dissolved, it was all too easy to forget during the frenzied fat fears of the 1990s. But I'm afraid munching on dry carrot sticks or eating plain steamed broccoli wouldn't be very fashionable to Jane, and neither is it very functional today. You'll get the fiber from vegetable, but not much else. Instead, follow the historic rule of thumb. If your vegetables have any color at all, these colors mean vitamins, and those vitamins need some sort of fat to wash them down healthfully. Even ditzy Lydia Bennet understood that much. She didn't triumphantly display her luncheon table in Pride and Prejudice until she spent a thoughtful moment dressing a salad and a cucumber. So, this one here is called Here is a Nut, a Beautiful Glossy Nut. I'll belabor you with no puns, dear reader, with this brief look at going nuts in Austen world. Jane doesn't mention nuts very frequently, but when she does, there's a clever insight attached. In Persuasion, Louisa and Captain Wentworth try their hand at gleaning for hazelnuts. That is, there's another name for hazelnuts. I've forgotten what they're called. Hazelnuts here. In a nearby hedgerow during the novel's long walk. Austen reminds us that this is happening in autumn, the only time when hazelnuts are, I think they're called filberts, are they, in some other places, are naturally found in England's hedgerows. Nuts were only a seasonal indulgence in the Regency era, and oftentimes hard to find when they were in season. Harriet talks of enjoying walnuts in Emma, but points out that Mr. Martin had to search 3 miles around to glean her some. And once people got their hands on nuts, they were the natural tough nut to crack types. And with all this gleaning and cracking, nobody had the patience to eat more than a handful at a time. Not only is this the way most people ate nuts for most human history, it's how the majority of health experts still recommend eating them in small handful-like quantities. Our grandparents would not buy nuts shelled. Now, I used to wonder about this, because they have these machines now that crack all the nuts and shell them. And they wanted to buy the walnuts in the shells. And they'd buy a big, huge bag of them. They'd crack a few every night and just eat them. Why would they want to do that? And here he explains that was the way that it was recommended to eat them most healthfully, was straight out of the shell. And also it kept you from just digging into a bag of already shelled nuts and overeating. While smart on weight management fronts, nuts are deceptively energy dense. Raw nuts are also high in phytates, the same anti-nutrients present in some vegetables. You don't want to be eating large quantities every day. Save nuts for those occasional delicious treats, eating about as many as one might reasonably expect while gleaning with your friends from Uppercross. Now that is extremely good advice. Make sure to be careful with children, though, because of the shells, and don't encourage, we buy them in the bag already shelled because we like to bake with them, but it might be good to get them in the, just go ahead and get them natural and in the shell for your snacks. Now, I want to say one more thing in parting, and that is that I have noticed that especially the girls, and some of the young men too, that grew up on this scripture from Jeremiah 6:16, look at the old paths where the good walk is, and walk in them, and you'll find rest for your souls. To look to some of the old things, like these stories that were written, and many of the people I know that grew up with Jane Austen and read before the movies were even made, read the books, and also were starting to adapt some of the lifestyle, like their tea time, their reading, their writing, their customs, their hospitality, their manners, I wrote some things down, the way they dressed, the way they walked, their homemaking, their needle crafts, things that were mentioned in these books, that the young women who read about these started to create their own culture. And culture it's just, the root word is cult. But it's just the things that you create around you that make your life interesting and part of your culture. And we have to decide not to get our culture from out there, what the media is giving us, and what your culture is often your jokes, the way your music, the way you dress, your manners, your food, the way you eat, and the way you spend your time, your learning and your education, all these things, your religion, all these things form your culture. We think of culture as going to the opera or learning to play the piano and playing the old classics, but we have to be careful that we create a culture that is not copying the prevailing culture. The prevailing culture is the way that it's pushed on us how to dress. It's pushed on us how to eat, and all the restaurants kind of dominate our food, and then our countries get labeled as a certain type of culture based on these companies, and based on the media, and based on what is being produced. And from clothing to food, we get labels of that's our culture. But you can create your own culture of home. And I've noticed a lot of girls that grew up with the homeschool mindset of looking into the past and looking into history and understanding how to do things, where things came from, how to make things, how to start from scratch, how clothing is put together, how food is grown. These people are happy. They're very happy. And then, of course, in the 80s, Tea Time magazine came out. So they kind of combined the tea time, the recipes and stuff into their culture. And so they have their own culture, and they're happy, and they understand life. And when they don't have anything to do, they can find something to do by their learning, and This is very hard to explain, but I have noticed many people that are extremely interested in the Austenite type of books and the culture of the time are very happy people because they adapt some of it into, they pick and choose what they want to create their own culture, and they have their own jokes, their own poetry, their own stories that they write, their own little government in their home. Like we have the governor here at the manse, and they just create their own culture. They're not looking to the world to make them happy. They're not waiting for the world to settle down to make them happy about the era they lived in. If they're not happy with the fashion of the era that they live in, they just create their own fashion, or they'll go back to another era that they like, and they're free. They're free from the prevailing culture, from the claws of it that seem to prevent people from really being creative and really creating their own culture. And so that's one of the reasons, that's one of the verses my children absolutely loved, was Jeremiah 6:16. Look at the paths of the old ways where the good walk is, and walk therein, and you'll find rest for yourselves. I have noticed people that really have created their own culture from good things. They just gleaned the good things out of everything. And they have their own plays. When our kids were growing up, we had our own plays, our own singings, and our own talent shows, and in the home. And we sometimes would pretend it was a big ship, and we got on the ship and we were going somewhere, and they had dinner in their stateroom, and we just did many things and created our own culture, because I knew that they would find out about the big world out there and all the travel and all the culture, all the things you could do, and not ever be able to do it. So we wanted them to have a taste of it in our home. And Jane Austen, her novels were probably a little bit more cheerful. And I also liked Elizabeth Gaskell from Wives and Daughters fame in North and South, because they had fairly good endings. There were some of the era that I didn't like. There are some authors that are considered, quote, classics, which I don't think they are very good or wholesome at all. And so what you have to do is create your own culture around you, especially in these times when the government of many countries is so crazy and putting restrictions and mandates on everyone. How blessed we are to have a dwelling place, a home, wherever you live, and create your own culture in it, and make things that, to prevent getting too bogged down in worry or depression, to make the things you do an event. Like I said earlier, if it's time to write letters, put your letter writing face on and your letter writing mind, and if you have to, find a special place that you would write letters and make a big ceremony out of it and get all the things out you need, and make an event out of it instead of a chore. And it goes that way for just about anything. In the olden days, if women had to clean their cabinets or your shelves, they would turn the radio on or light a little scented candle or do something to make it less burdensome. Now, ladies, I hope you've had a good time today and that you've gotten a lot of things done. And so my mandate for you today is to try to press a flower in an old book. Put a marker in there so you'll know where it is, or an old telephone book. Do they even have those anymore? And or an old catalog. We get catalogs in the mail still. And press a flower or a leaf in there, and then one day go back and look and take it out. I remember when I was just a little girl, I must have been 5 or 6, seeing the dried flowers inside of old catalogs and enjoying turning the pages to see these in there. I didn't quite understand what they were for, but the message that I got, naturally was, the person that put it in here thought this was precious, and this leaf must have been important for someone to have saved it like this. And that's the impression that I got. Now, you might not think something like this is important, but you can create your own culture with things like this. So, ladies, I hope you've gotten a lot done and that you have been able to go on your walk. And I'd just like to encourage you all spend 5 minutes doing something like rocking in a rocking chair, sitting on your little trampoline and just bouncing, and spend 5 minutes reading aloud, and spend 5 minutes cleaning out something, sorting something, getting something straightened out. I walk past things so often I don't realize that, hey, I should probably straighten that out again and clean it out again. And just because all of these things are good for the mind. And also spend 5 minutes standing in the sunshine or walking in the sunshine. And even if you have a tiny little backyard or front yard, get a chair and go sit out in it. I used to think it was really silly. We would be going on a trip, and when I was a kid, and go past some country areas and that weren't real rich, and someone would have a chair and be sitting out in the middle of their front lawn, just sitting there. But after reading Brian Kozlowski's book and about the world where people deliberately would appreciate being outside in the air, I now understand that more.